Welcome to the Event Marketing Show, episode 4 of 2021. I cannot believe we're this deep into 2021 already. Today's discussion, I think, is a really interesting one, and I'm very excited about the guest we have for you, which I'll get to in just a second. But one thing I always tell my team, whether they're working on marketing projects, an event, of course, or anything really like business related, is to focus on your focus. And I think it's one of the most critical things that any team leader can do when it comes to big projects, because there's this tendency to, once you have this great idea, no matter what you're executing, is to look and say, oh, the sky's the limit. We can do anything. But when you start saying we can do anything, then you're not doing the 1 or 2 or 3 things that you need to do. So today, what I want to address very specifically is this idea. Having attendees doesn't guarantee that they'll engage. But consider this question. But having an event doesn't always mean you need to engage your audience. And I brought our guest to help us suss this out. And I'd love to welcome Ashanti Bentil-Dhue, founder and CEO of EventMind, an amazing agency that specializes specifically in helping companies like yours choose the right event tech so you can focus on running a smooth event. Ashanti is also an advisory board member at the Virtual Events Institute and co-founder of Diversity Ally, helping businesses drive diversity and inclusion initiatives. She's really amazing, and so I'm so glad to welcome her. Ashanti, how are you?
How are you? Lovely to be here. Thank you for that introduction.
Yeah, of course. Well, you are a busy lady, by the way. You seem to be being all over the place, doing so many amazing things. I almost want to ask you first, what's the most favorite thing to work on? What's the most exciting thing you're working on these days?
Yeah. Do you know what? It's so interesting that you say that, because recently I was just thinking, what is it I actually do? And at the heart of it, I love building diverse digital communities. So I love working with technology. And of course, I feel that diversity is so valuable to us all. And at the heart of it, that's what I do. So whether I'm helping an events company be more diverse, or indeed helping a company choose the technology for their event, it all really leads to that same place of building diverse digital communities.
Amazing. And when did you found EventMind? How long have you been in business?
So I've been doing tech consulting for 5 years. Awesome. And what I did is I rebranded, and ironically, just before the pandemic begun, because what would always happen, of course, is that people would ask me to help them run their online events. And a lot of these things just came from ideas and mind. And so that's how I rebranded to be EventMind, essentially. So here we are.
Amazing. So let's jump right into it, because I think this is an interesting question. And you and I had a chance to talk before we jumped on a little bit, but I want to set the stage. So I think, but I'm curious what you think, obviously, that there's a difference between building an engaged community and versus generating an audience. And I think often people mistake, depending on the type of event that they're having, whether or not it's their responsibility or there's a business objective behind driving actual engagement during said event versus just driving an audience to be there, consume the content, and then take something away from it. How do you differentiate between the two? And how do you advise your clients how to identify which is their priority?
Absolutely. And I think this is such a great question, the difference between audience and community. And if you think about it, for example, before we were all working online, TV shows had audiences. They always talk about audience ratings and audience numbers, because traditionally, prior to recent kind of evolution of certain TV programs, we would all just sit in our respective homes and watch.
Right.
Even actually to a great extent, if you go and watch sports at maybe a sports bar, you just watch the game, okay? So you are part of the audience. And the only ratings that a broadcasting company really would look at is how many people tuned in. And we still see that happening. Just recently, those big interviews that Oprah does, for example, people will talk about the audience ratings. Now, the difference, though, I'd say, is community. These are engaged people who interact with each other, who generate content for you. And that's the difference between an audience and a community. Now, there is a few shows who actually are managing to do both. So if you think about a traditional game show, for example, where they get the audience to vote for things, they use the audience preferences to make decisions about what people in the show, contestants, do or say or win. So we see game shows really started to bridge the gap between audience and community. But I think the best example, which I've been talking about for years that people thought I was crazy prior to the pandemic about, is Love Island.
And also Big Brother. What is the premise of this show?
Yes, so we all know about Big Brother. Okay, yes. So Big Brother lived and died on the people voting. Who left, who stayed, what challenges happened. We now have I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. They bridge that gap between community and audience because there's a lot of actually audience interaction that impacts what happens in the show. But Love Island is all of those things on steroid. So the premise of Love Island is that a group of single people are taken to an island to find love. And there is so much interaction in Gen Z specifically and millennial. So the audience is millennial and Gen Z. But what we saw with Love Island is this shift towards social media, specifically Instagram and Twitter, being used by the audience, by the show producers, and by the brands that were sponsoring. So Love Island is a brilliant example for event brands, because if you are trying to build audience and then engage them to become a community that does selling for you, then you want to look at a brand like Love Island, because they do that very, very well with their target generation, which is largely at the moment Gen Z.
Okay, so let me ask you a question on that. So I think that's really fascinating, by the way. So how would you define the two different business objectives between building an audience versus building a community, and what unique purpose do you think each serves? You know, they both serve similar purposes in some regard. Yeah. Like, what is the unique differentiation between the two?
So I think when it comes to building communities, the good thing about communities is that you can generate direct income from a community, right? Sure. So for example, but often when you have an audience, you're trying to leverage the audience to make money, whether that's through sponsorships, etc., because people are attracted to the size of your audience and the demographic of your audience. So you might say we have 60,000 followers on Instagram, X amount of impressions and engagements. Do you want to sponsor our event? Because you'll be able to be put in front of our audience. Whereas if you have a community, you don't necessarily have to leverage any other sponsorships. You can quite simply launch a product or service or event directly with that community, and they will pay for whatever it is that you're selling. So I believe communities are so much stronger because it's almost straight to market. It's direct to paying customer, whereas audience, you usually have to use multiple strategies, and you're usually leveraging your audience. You're not able all of the time to immediately generate income from them.
Well, and I imagine, not imagine, I know the other thing with audience, of course, is that it has to be orders of magnitude larger for it to produce a similar revenue result.
Exactly. So you've hit on something so key, because now in the age of micro influencers, now in the age of where people see the value in having a niche or a niche, as I know North Americans may say, you're so right. So size and volume is not relevant for community. We see, for example, you take a YouTube channel that is all about how you groom a new puppy.
Sure.
You would think, unless you have a new puppy, you may not be a part of that audience.
Well, it wouldn't be relevant.
Exactly, but I've seen YouTube channels with millions of subscribers, engaged community, who all care about how to groom a brand new lab. And we can go even further down, we can niche it down, how to groom a golden lab specifically, right? And you see how strong those communities get. Another example is there's a couple who teach people how to live in a caravan. Super, super niche, because the majority of people do not live in caravans, but they have a really, really engaged community because they have a niche. And actually, if they were to sell a course or host an event or even a meet and greet so that people could meet them, if they get the pricing right, they don't need to use any other type of advertising or marketing, because they have a community that they can email literally and say, hey, we're going to be doing this meet and greet, and the ticket sales will come from that community.
One of the best examples I've seen this in we'll call it the SaaS marketplace, I guess, has been maybe it'll be interesting for you to define this a little bit, right? So one of the best influencers when it comes to narrative and storytelling, and I'm sure you've seen his stuff around, is Dave Gurr, formerly of Drift. Now he's the CMO at Privy. But I watched him when he made his transition, and the audience he built, just by the popularity of his content, the transparency of his, of the way he does business, I guess would be the way to put that. He's a supreme documentarian, right? He's always just simply documenting the things that he's doing and then sharing that with people. But what I watched him do was when he turned on his community, which by the way is only like 2,500 active subscribers, he had different tiers of pricing model, right? For $5, you can do his podcast and some content. For $35 a month, you got something else. And then for, I think it was $1,500 a month, you could get him on a call once a month. And that was like the thing that he, just for this community of people. And the tweet that I'll never forget is he launched it, and 48 hours later, he tweeted this out, and he said, I just created more monthly recurring revenue than all of the salary I've ever had in my entire life, like just by doing this. This leads to a question, by the way. What comes first, community or audience? And then there's a follow, and then I have a follow-up question to that. First, I want to kind of focus on that. Who do you try to attract first? And I want to talk about how you do that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I do think it really depends, because if you're brand new in whatever sector you're trying to break into, I think initially you clearly are building audience. Sure. Because no one knows you at all. So if you're completely brand new, you're a new market entry, you will initially be building audience because you don't have long-standing relationships. You may not have an existing personal brand, and you may not have built trust and credibility up in that market to be able to build community right away. Right. So I think it does depend whether you are a new entrant or an existing one. And I think examples like the one that you just gave, one of the reasons why he would have been able to transition into monetizing that so quickly is because of the time and credibility that he has behind him. So he could probably have launched anything, because I assume, and I see this model being used often, even the call that he's launched, there's no plan as to what's going to be discussed. This could be people who just want to chat about his weekend.
Right.
So he's in a position. Yes. Exactly. And this is the beautiful thing about tools like Patreon, tools like even actually, if you want to do YouTube, because you can actually have your paid subscriber piece behind YouTube, tools like Substack that allow you to launch paid newsletters. I love to see things like that because, yes, if you have built up, if you've moved from audience to community, then those kind of models work very well. So I think if you're a new entrant, it's probably more likely that you're building audience. But if you're smart, you can be strategic from the beginning so that you can start building community simultaneously. So really getting those early adopters who will become a part of your community.
I think that's exactly right. And I think some of them, tell me if you see people making this mistake when they're building audience. I think sometimes when I see people trying, companies, brands, doesn't matter, influencers trying to build audience that aren't necessarily doing it the right way, is they're trying to speak one to many when instead they should be speaking one to one, and they're building exercise. It might go a little slower if you do it in this manner, but if you start from a point of intimacy, then you'll find your initial, we'll call it the beta audience or like your early audience, might likely become that community, right? The people that they feel that affinity. Okay, you agree with this then?
Oh, and this is the thing, it makes it so much easier because, and the thing is, this is talked about in marketing all the time, and yet it's one of, I think, the biggest pieces of advice that people ignore, which is they try to talk to everyone all of the time, all at once. And you have to sometimes have the courage as a brand or as an influencer to go deeper into a niche for a period of time. And that's the other thing I don't think people realize. Just because you do that, that doesn't mean you have to do that all the time and forever. But there is a value in doing it, particularly at the beginning of your journey. And again, that example you gave about David, we see lots of these kind of influencers. You look at like a Gary Vee, for example, he can sell anything now. But when he first started out, he would have gone deep into a niche, established that credibility and trust. And now he's reached this place where it evens out so that if he wanted to start selling lampshades, he could, because that credibility is there. And I think that's something that people don't realize. Talk to one person, talk to that one problem that they have, and you'd be surprised how many one persons with that one problem exist.
Awesome. I think that's fantastic advice. It's a very, in the improv community, it's a very yes and type of attitude, right? Which is, okay. So let's get down to like brass tacks on a particular question. How would you instruct an event marketer or an event manager or even a business owner or whatever else to make the decision for how they should leverage their next event? Should they focus more on, like you're suggesting, a niche, building a small community around that and maybe a bunch of smaller events, or driving more towards, because their CEO wants the annual conference, I want 5,000 people there, I want to do the whole thing. Which one of these things do you think actually has more ROI? I know we talked about it a little bit, but how do you make that decision? Because they got to sell it to somebody, right? Which is
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good question. Again, I think it depends on where you're starting from and what you have in terms of resources. If you are a completely brand new event concept, and we're living in a time now because of COVID and because of the accessibility of event technology, there are lots of challenger event brands now in the world.
Sure.
So these big exhibition companies, big event companies who had maybe a monopoly on the market for many years, now that a new brand can come into the space using technology, community is going to become very important, very important. And what I have observed is a lot of these companies have taken that for granted. So they had audiences, they hadn't built communities from them. So I would say it depends on where you are at now and where you're starting from. So for example, do you have an engaged mailing list? Do you have a list of delegates from previous events that you could pick up the phone to and say, hey, we're doing this event. These are the top takeaways. Let me send you a payment link. Now, quite often, most brands don't have those types of connected communities in existence already. Sure. And so what you can do is a series of smaller events that you can generate income from, but also simultaneously build community from, so that you can launch a large annual conference, because you would have all of the collateral, the social proof, all of the content collateral, all of the community work you've been doing over a period of time. And we've done that ourselves. So we've done smaller community-based events that lead up to a larger annual event. And what that has meant was, when it comes to sourcing speakers for the annual event, really easy. When it comes to creating a pricing strategy, really easy, because we know what people are paying anyway. When it comes to knowing what the content should be for that annual conference, it's a lot easier, because I know what content was engaged with on the smaller events, but I also know what the important problems are that my audience are experiencing, because over a period of months, I've stayed sticky and I've asked them all the time, what do you need? What do you want next? Right. And I am now able to make sure that that is the content at the annual conference. And so what I'm doing is engineering the process so that we get the success we want.
So what you set up there is such an amazing feedback loop, so that you can, it's the age old, they ask, you answer, and by shooting your, by putting all your chips into one single event, you're not giving yourself an opportunity to actually be as successful as you would like. And I love this idea, because I think so many, I'll even just say marketing teams, which is more where my experience is, they're all looking for this, right? Like this giant, up and to the right. Sorry, it's actually this way. I'm backwards in my but all up and to the right. Like that's all they ever want, right? What that really looks like, if you're serious about growth, is like this.
Yeah.
Like it's never, the chart that they share on Growth Hackers or, on Sales Hacker or wherever is the clean one. It's where they hit the inflection point, but they don't show you what happened beforehand, which is like a bunch of up and down.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
No, sorry. I mean, one of the biggest things I always say to my team is stay humble and keep hunting. Because what happens is that companies, they forget to stay humble. So they don't call their delegates. They don't call the most engaged delegates. They don't look at who opens emails, who clicked on certain links. They don't go and contact them on LinkedIn and say, hey, I noticed that you opened our email, you were interested in XYZ offer. We'd love to have a chat about what it was that interested you. They aren't doing that work. So you don't get the data that you need. And the second thing, as I said, is keep hunting. We always start from ground zero. Even if I've sold 100 tickets, I will sell the next 100 like we have 0. And we will keep hunting. We don't expect, in terms of the way we design an event, engineer the experience, or market the event, people to just notice us, trust us, and buy from us. We stay humble and we keep hunting the whole time. And I think that is what event brands need to get better at doing at the moment, so that you can sell tickets, especially to your paid events.
Right. I think that's awesome. I want to ask you like a huge question, but I know we're not going to have enough time to go. So I'm going to ask it, and then I'll get your like 30,000 foot answer. And then maybe, because I know you're a super busy lady, maybe we could, have you back another time.
Yeah, I'd love to.
But so, because there are 2 last questions I want to make sure we get to, but this first one just popped in my mind. Where to you do these communities live? Like, where is the best place to start housing a community? And then, and of course, the second part is how do you get them to interact with one another? I've tried this a bunch in my marketing career to build communities. I've put thousands of people in private Facebook group, thousands of people in a private LinkedIn group or whatever else, and crickets. No matter how many different questions or poking and prodding I would do to that community, and it's really hard to get people to talk to one another. Particularly when they're shy or like they don't think they should do it. This is why Clubhouse is so fascinating to me.
Love Clubhouse, as you know. So there's a couple of things. I think there's 2 elements to this. One is that logistically, you have to make it easy for people to access that community, not just participate. So what we see sometimes is companies have all these fancy sales funnels that you literally have to go through an assault course just to get to the community. I don't think that's a great idea. Keep it really simple. 1-click link. Maybe, of course, you're verifying people's identities, fine, but let them in the password. So I would say use platforms and tools that are easy and accessible for those who desire to be part of the community. And so to that point, you might choose a LinkedIn group, you might have a Facebook group, you might have a Slack group. We see that very often at the moment. The other thing that's really popular is WhatsApp groups now. Lots of businesses are using WhatsApp to house these communities, because of course you can just message people, you can drop photos, videos in really quickly, and people, you are in their space because they have their phone on them. So I think that the platform is less relevant. It's just about ease of accessing that platform, that space for your desired community members. Think about who they are, because if you've got certain stakeholders who are over 60, for example, they might be the decision makers in your industry, but realistically, what are they using? And don't take them onto platforms that they might not be on, like Clubhouse at the moment. The work you'll have to put in to get them to even download the app, much less use it. They're not going to use it just for your chat. So I think it's about thinking about accessibility and what tool aligns with your target audience as well. And then the second thing is about giving them, what we do is we make our community the champions and the superstars of our content. And that's how we get them to engage with each other. And that's how we get them to share that they're a part of our community. So our content and our community experience is never about us. It is exclusively around our community's needs, their wants, who they want to speak to, who they want to hear from. And once we get them into our community, one of the first things we always do is say, hey, we'd love to interview you on the podcast show. We'd love to have you on a panel. So we get them involved. And what we do is we supply all of the collateral for them to obviously market, giving us social proof and more content quite often in the process as well.
I love that. I think so many people, when they join a community, it's a chicken or the egg thing, right? It's like they want value out of it, but what they fail, sometimes what they fail to recognize is that you are the value. You and the peers that have come together here are the value. And if you don't create it yourself, and so I love the way that you're choosing to facilitate, those types of experiences. So I'll ask a very last and specific question for today, which is, I've been dealing with, this has been great, by the way. I really enjoyed this conversation. So you're dealing with lots of different virtual event platforms. Let's say that someone wants to build a community inside. Actually, let me ask this question in a different way. Can you even build a community inside of a single event? It really has to live outside, doesn't it? Isn't the point of the event, it's like the events themselves, to introduce someone to a community, and then that community lives on elsewhere? Because an event is like a thing that happens and it ends, and the community lives on forever. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think so. This is, again, depends on what our vision or idea or concept of event is. I think that anything could be an event, but you are right in the sense that the strength and the connection in that community and being able to get return on investment in building the community doesn't lie solely in one event. You can use an event to launch a community. You can use an event to bring a community closer together. You can use an event to market a community. So the event by itself is probably not going to do all the work for you. It's all of those things that we talked about earlier that really is going to ensure that you engineer your results. And so I would agree with you. I think events are tools. And when carefully placed along the way, then you can absolutely build a community that you can do anything with. And we see, for example, brands who had built communities so that when in-person events were no longer possible, they still had people turning up to their virtual events because they built community.
Right.
That's why. And so that community was based on more than just the in-person event. Yes, it's a nice to have. Yes, we like to hobnob by the buffet, but the reality is it was the content, it was probably the organizers, the brands, whoever they were, and their values.
Right.
That those were the things that connected those individuals so that they still engaged in new circumstances and settings online.
What do you think are the best types of features for, like, the marketplace is so mixed right now. And I think it's funny. Yeah. When you need something, you think it's existed all along. And it's not that virtual event tools haven't existed before the pandemic, but obviously their importance has come into stark relief. And now it perhaps might be even waning a little bit as we, turn the corner on this. Although I don't think events will ever be the same.
Yes.
Again, another large topic, hybrid events. But so but my question is, if extracting, introducing, marketing or promoting a community is the goal, what types of tools do you think an event platform, that people should be looking for in their event platform to help facilitate those particular goals?
That's really, again, it's probably an unpopular opinion. I say it a lot. I don't think technology can do that by itself.
I love that answer. I love that.
It can't. And technology is inanimate. It still does, to a certain extent, what we tell it to do. And the thing that we can't control is human nature and human behavior. We can influence it, but we can't control it. And so what happens, for example, if you have 100 people, 100 delegates and attendees turn up to your event, but all of them are introverts? They're not necessarily going to behave any differently to the way they behaved at an in-person event. They might still sit at the back. They might still only talk to the person next to them, for example. And so I often chuckle when I see all of these thought pieces and threads about creating engagement at virtual events and how difficult it is, as if creating engagement at an in-person event was somehow easier. It's the same people going, So I think it's more about, again, how you engineer the overall experience. You have to influence human behavior through incentivization, number one. And number two, through solving a particular problem for that person or that stakeholder, that delegate. And what I mean by that is that doesn't have to be a business problem. It could be a yearning to be around other people. It could be that they are particularly interested in a particular yoga class you're putting on in the virtual space because they need some relaxation. Whatever it is, you need to meet the need that individual has. And obviously you've got to work really hard to show them that you can meet that need. And that will mean they turn up and engage. And of course, as you know, there are various ways of measuring, and the metrics for engagement in the virtual space. Sure. But I think ultimately, this isn't really about the functions and features of the platform. It's about how you designed your event and how well you know your delegates. If you don't know them very well, and you haven't designed the overall experience very well, you could choose any platform and you're still going to get the same kind of probably mediocre results.
I'm not going to repeat what you said, but I'm going to tell the audience, by the way, this will be an on-demand piece of content. So rewind this thing and listen to that answer again, because I think all the advice that you've given has been amazing, right? But the most important thing I think you just said is that people look at technology as a panacea, as a silver bullet. in any space, whether it's marketing automation or sales or event technology. And there is no substitute for human to human value, like understanding behavior and understanding what desires and needs are. I can't.
And you just have to be willing to ask people. I think that's the thing that's been lost, is the art of conversation. And if we can, because I have no problem. I mean, we have a database of about 300 event technology companies. And over the last 6 months, I've spoken to a good proportion. And when I say, I mean a good proportion of them. They've all booked into my diary. And I've had face-to-face or virtual conversations with them all. That is why I know what the problems are. That is why I know, okay, we should probably think about this, or let's produce some content on that. It was from those conversations. And you cannot get that unless you know your delegates particularly well. You just can't get that information. So be willing to go pick up the phone. If you don't have a delegate list that you can pick up the phone to at least a few people on it, I would say you don't know those people well enough.
I love that. As a marketer and a salesperson, and I advocate for like the combined sales and the growth team, as I call it, right? So it's not sales or marketing, it's all the same thing. But I always tell my marketers, and when I have them in a company, I make them go sit on sales calls for at least a month, make their own BDR calls. And they always ask me why. And I was like, because as a marketer, you don't talk to people person to person, like talk to a human being, ask them about this thing. So I love this. And Ashanti, I'm gonna have to stop myself because we could go on. But thank you so much for joining us. I would love to have you back if you are ever so willing and happy.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I can't thank you enough. Can you tell people where to find you? Where they can find your company? All that.
Sure. So my playground, I hang out on LinkedIn. I'm on there every single day. So just type my name into LinkedIn and I will come up. Connect with me, and let's chat.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, and good luck with all of your endeavors, and I look forward to talking again soon.
Thank you very much.
And that does it for Event Marketing Show episode number 4. That was a fantastic conversation. If anyone in the audience has questions or ideas or topic considerations or anything like that, please make sure to let us know. You can email us. We'll put the information up on the screen. We would love to hear from you per Ashanti's suggestion. It is your input that gives the value to this show. Thanks so much. See you next time. Thank you.